The morning started like any other Tuesday at Buckingham Palace. Royal Guard Sergeant Thomas Bennet stood at his usual post near the private residence wing, his uniform pressed to perfection, his face showing no emotion. He had served the royal family for 15 years, and in all that time he had never broken protocol. He was known among his colleagues as a man of duty, someone who took his responsibilities seriously and never questioned orders. But today would be different. Today would change everything he thought he knew about loyalty, duty, and the secrets that lived within the palace walls. It was 7 in the morning when Thomas received his assignment. The head of security, Commander Harrison, called him into his office with an urgent expression on his weathered face. The commander was a man who had seen everything in his 30 years of service, yet even he seemed troubled this morning. Thomas entered the office and stood at attention. The commander gestured for him to close the door, which was unusual. Most briefings happened in the open, with multiple guards present. This secrecy made Thomas uncomfortable, but he followed orders without question. Commander Harrison held up a sealed envelope. The royal crest gleamed on the wax seal, indicating this was an official document of the highest importance. He explained that Queen Camilla had requested a discreet security escort for a personal matter. She needed to visit a private medical facility in London for what was described as a routine health check. Nothing unusual about that, Thomas thought. Royals often had medical appointments that required security. But then Commander Harrison added something that made Thomas pause. The visit was not on the official schedule. No other staff members would be informed. The Queen had specifically requested minimal security presence. Just one guard who could be trusted to remain silent about the appointment. Thomas was chosen because of his spotless record and reputation for discretion. Thomas accepted the assignment without hesitation. He had protected members of the royal family countless times before. This would be no different, or so he believed. At 9:30, a private car pulled into a secure entrance at the back of the palace. Thomas escorted Queen Camilla from her private chambers to the vehicle. She wore a simple coat and sunglasses, dressed to avoid attention. She seemed nervous, which was unlike her usual composed demeanor. Thomas had seen her handle difficult public appearances with grace, but today she kept glancing at her watch and fidgeting with her handbag. The drive to the medical facility took 40 minutes through London traffic. Thomas sat in the front passenger seat while the Queen sat in the back. She made no conversation during the journey, which was also unusual. Normally, she would make small talk with staff, asking about their families or commenting on the weather. Today she remained silent, lost in thought. They arrived at an exclusive private clinic in Kensington. The building looked like a normal townhouse from the outside, with no signs indicating it was a medical facility. Thomas helped the Queen from the car and escorted her to a side entrance. A woman in a white coat met them at the door. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell and welcomed the Queen with a respectful nod. Dr. Mitchell asked Thomas to wait in a small security room near the entrance. She explained that the appointment would take approximately 1 hour. Thomas settled into a chair and prepared to wait. The room was plain, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a monitor showing the building's security cameras. 20 minutes passed. Thomas checked his watch and glanced at the security monitor. He could see the Queen in one of the examination rooms talking with Dr. Mitchell. Everything seemed routine. Then something unexpected happened. A young laboratory technician entered the security room looking flustered. She was carrying a folder and seemed to be searching for something. She apologized to Thomas for the interruption, explaining that she needed to check a storage cabinet in the room. Thomas nodded and returned his attention to the monitor. The technician opened the cabinet and began sorting through files. As she worked, she accidentally dropped the folder she was carrying. Papers scattered across the floor. Thomas immediately stood to help her collect them. It was a simple act of courtesy, nothing more. As Thomas picked up several sheets of paper, his eyes caught sight of a document header. It read DNA analysis report in bold letters. Below that, he saw a name that made his blood run cold. The name was Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. Thomas tried not to look at the content. He knew that reading private medical documents was a serious breach of protocol. But the papers were right there in his hands, and his eyes betrayed him. He saw phrases that made no sense at first. Comparative analysis, biological relationship testing, paternity markers, DNA sequence matching. The technician quickly grabbed the papers from his hands, her face turning red. She stammered an apology and rushed out of the room, clutching the folder tightly to her chest. Thomas stood frozen, his mind racing. What had he just seen? Why would Queen Camilla need a DNA analysis? And more importantly, why was it being done in secret? Thomas returned to his chair, but he could no longer focus on the security monitor. His training told him to forget what he had seen, to maintain his professional distance. But his curiosity was overwhelming. He had glimpsed something that was clearly meant to remain hidden, something that could have serious implications. 40 minutes later, Dr. Mitchell appeared at the security room door. She informed Thomas that the Queen was ready to leave. Thomas stood and followed her down the corridor. As they walked, he noticed something odd. Dr. Mitchell kept glancing at him with a worried expression, as if she knew something had gone wrong. They reached the examination room where Queen Camilla was waiting. She had removed her sunglasses, and Thomas could see that her eyes were red as if she had been crying. This alarmed him more than anything else he had witnessed that morning. The Queen was always so controlled, so composed in public. Seeing her in this vulnerable state was deeply unsettling. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell pulled the Queen aside and whispered something in her ear. The Queen's face went pale. She looked directly at Thomas with an expression he would never forget. It was a mixture of fear, anger, and something else he could not quite identify. Desperation, perhaps. The Queen approached Thomas slowly. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tension beneath her words. She asked him a simple question. Had he seen anything unusual during his wait? Had anyone spoken to him? Had he looked at any documents? Thomas knew this was the moment that would define the rest of his career. He could lie, claim he had seen nothing. That would be the safe choice, the easy path. But he had never lied to a member of the royal family before. His entire service was built on honesty and integrity. Before he could answer, the Queen held up her hand. She told him they needed to speak privately. Dr. Mitchell left the room, closing the door behind her. Now it was just Thomas and the Queen, alone in the small examination room. Queen Camilla sat down and gestured for Thomas to do the same. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the British monarchy. Queen Camilla took a deep breath and looked directly into Thomas's eyes. Her royal composure was cracking, revealing a woman under immense pressure. She asked him again, more firmly this time, whether he had seen any documents during his wait. Thomas felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had two choices before him, and both carried serious consequences. He decided to tell the truth. Thomas explained that a technician had dropped some papers, and while helping to collect them, he had glimpsed a DNA analysis report with the Queen's name on it. He assured her that he had not read the contents in detail, only seen the header and a few technical phrases he did not fully understand. The Queen closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. When she opened them again, tears were forming at the corners. She thanked Thomas for his honesty and told him that what he had accidentally discovered was a matter of extreme sensitivity. She asked him to sit down because what she was about to share would be difficult to hear. Thomas sat, his military training keeping his posture straight despite his racing thoughts. The Queen began to speak in a quiet voice, choosing her words carefully. She explained that the DNA test was not about a health issue, as the official story suggested. It was about something far more complicated, something that could potentially damage the monarchy's reputation. Several months ago, the Queen continued, she had received an anonymous letter. The letter contained claims about her family history that contradicted the official records. At first, she had dismissed it as the work of a conspiracy theorist or someone seeking attention. But the letter included specific details that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. The letter alleged that her biological father was not Bruce Shand, the man she had always known as her father. Instead, it claimed that her mother, Rosalind Shand, had been involved in a secret relationship during the war years. The letter provided dates, locations, and circumstantial evidence that seemed disturbingly credible. Queen Camilla told Thomas that she had tried to ignore the letter, but it haunted her. She began having doubts about her own identity. She wondered if her entire life had been built on a hidden truth. The uncertainty became unbearable, affecting her sleep and her ability to carry out her royal duties. she decided to arrange for a discreet DNA test, using samples from her late father's personal belongings and her own genetic material. The test was conducted in absolute secrecy. Only Dr. Mitchell and a small team of trusted scientists knew about it. The Queen had not even told King Charles about her investigation. Thomas listened in stunned silence. This was beyond anything he had imagined. He was hearing secrets that could rewrite royal history. He asked the Queen why she was telling him all of this. Why not simply order him to forget what he had seen? Queen Camilla explained that she needed his help. The DNA results had arrived today, and they confirmed her worst fears. Bruce Shand was not her biological father. The test revealed that she was the daughter of someone else entirely. Someone whose identity could cause a massive scandal if it became public knowledge. The Queen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London streets below. She told Thomas that she now faced an impossible decision. Should she keep the secret buried, or should she reveal the truth and face the consequences? Either choice would have profound implications for her life and for the royal family. Thomas found his voice and asked who the biological father was. The Queen turned to face him, and he could see genuine anguish in her expression. She said that according to the investigation conducted by Dr. Mitchell's team, her real father had been a prominent figure in British society during the war years, a man whose name was well known, but whose connection to her mother had never been suspected. Before the Queen could reveal the name, there was a sharp knock on the door. Dr. Mitchell entered quickly, looking alarmed. She apologized for the interruption but said there was an urgent problem. The laboratory technician who had dropped the papers was extremely upset. She feared she would lose her job for her carelessness. More concerning was that the technician had mentioned the incident to her supervisor, not realizing the sensitivity of the documents involved. The supervisor was now asking questions about why royal DNA analysis was being conducted at their facility. Dr. Mitchell had managed to deflect the questions temporarily, but she warned that word might spread. Queen Camilla's face went pale. This was exactly what she had feared. The secret she had tried so hard to protect was already beginning to leak. She made a quick decision. They needed to leave the clinic immediately and return to the palace. She would figure out how to handle the situation from there. Thomas escorted the Queen back to the car. During the drive back to Buckingham Palace, she sat in silence, clearly deep in thought. Thomas respected her need for quiet, but his mind was racing with questions. He wondered what would happen next. Would the Queen tell King Charles? Would she try to suppress the information? Would she need Thomas to do something to help contain the situation? When they arrived at the palace, Queen Camilla turned to Thomas before exiting the car. She thanked him for his service and his discretion. Then she said something that chilled him to his core. She told him that over the next few days he might be asked to do things that seemed unusual. She hoped she could count on his loyalty and his silence. Thomas assured her of his complete loyalty. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and he would honor that oath. But as he watched the Queen walk away toward her private quarters, he felt a growing sense of unease. He had been drawn into something dangerous, something that went far beyond his normal duties as a royal guard. That evening, Thomas returned to his small apartment near the barracks. He could not stop thinking about everything he had learned. He considered calling Commander Harrison to report the unusual events of the day, but the Queen had specifically asked for his silence. He was caught between his duty to his superiors and his promise to the Queen. As he sat in his living room, Thomas noticed his phone ringing. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Edward Winters, a journalist with a major British newspaper. Thomas's blood ran cold. How did this journalist get his private number? Edward Winters explained that he had been investigating rumors about Queen Camilla's recent activities. He had sources at the medical clinic who mentioned that a royal guard had been present during a secret visit. He wanted to know what Thomas had seen during that visit. He offered Thomas money for information, claiming it was in the public interest to know the truth. Thomas immediately ended the call. His hands were shaking. The situation was spiraling out of control much faster than anyone had anticipated. The journalists were already sniffing around. It would only be a matter of time before the story broke. He needed to warn the Queen immediately. Thomas tried calling Commander Harrison's secure line, but there was no answer. He left a brief message stating that he had urgent information regarding the Queen's security. Then he paced his apartment, unsure of what to do next. At midnight, Thomas received a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single sentence that made his stomach drop. The message read, "We know what you saw at the clinic. Tomorrow morning, come to St. James's Park alone if you want to help protect Her Majesty." Thomas stared at the message, his mind racing. Who had sent this? Was it someone from the palace trying to help? Or was it a trap? He had no way of knowing, but one thing was certain. Tomorrow would bring answers, and those answers might change everything. Thomas barely slept that night. He kept checking his phone, wondering if another mysterious message would arrive. The text about meeting at St. James's Park haunted his thoughts. Should he go? Should he report this to his superiors? Every option seemed to carry risks he could not fully calculate. At 5 in the morning, Thomas gave up trying to sleep. He showered, dressed in civilian clothes instead of his uniform, and left his apartment. The streets of London were quiet at this early hour. A light rain was falling, typical for November. He walked toward St. James's Park, his training keeping him alert to his surroundings. The park was nearly empty when he arrived at 6:30. A few early morning joggers passed by and some ducks gathered near the lake. Thomas found a bench near the water and sat down. He had arrived 30 minutes early, wanting to observe the area before the meeting time. At exactly 7, a woman in a dark coat approached the bench. She was middle-aged with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore glasses and carried a leather briefcase. She sat down beside Thomas without looking at him directly. The woman spoke in a low voice. She introduced herself as Margaret Thornton, explaining that she worked in the palace's private records office. She had served the royal family for over 20 years, maintaining confidential documents and family archives. What she was about to tell Thomas, she said, could put both of their careers at risk. Margaret explained that she had been watching the situation with Queen Camilla's DNA investigation unfold from behind the scenes. She had access to historical records that few others could see. When she learned that the Queen was conducting genetic testing, she decided to do some research of her own. What Margaret discovered alarmed her deeply. She found old correspondence between Rosalind Shand and a mysterious figure referred to only by initials in the letters. The letters dated back to wartime Britain, when Rosalind was a young woman working in London. The correspondence suggested a passionate relationship that had been kept secret from society. Margaret had spent weeks trying to identify the man behind the initials. She cross-referenced dates, locations, and historical records. Eventually, she uncovered an identity that shocked her. The man was Lord William Hertford, a decorated war hero and member of an aristocratic family. He had died in combat in 1944, never knowing that Rosalind Shand was pregnant with his child. Thomas listened with growing disbelief. If this was true, it meant that Queen Camilla was descended from the Hertford family, one of the oldest noble lineages in England. But there was more to the story, Margaret continued. Lord William Hertford had been married at the time of his affair with Rosalind. He had a legitimate son who inherited the family title. That legitimate son was still alive today. His name was Henry Hertford, the current Duke of Somerset. He was a prominent figure in British society, known for his charitable work and his close relationship with the royal family. He had no idea that Queen Camilla was his half-sister. Thomas asked Margaret why she was telling him this. What did she expect him to do with this information? Margaret's expression became grave. She explained that powerful people within the palace were already working to suppress the DNA test results. They feared the scandal that would erupt if the truth became public. But Margaret believed the truth should not be buried. She felt that Queen Camilla deserved to know her real heritage, and that Henry Hertford had a right to know about his half-sister. More importantly, she worried about what would happen if the information was leaked by less scrupulous sources. If journalists discovered the truth first, the story would be sensationalized and distorted. Margaret told Thomas that she had contacted him because she knew he had been present at the clinic. She believed he could help convince the Queen to handle the situation openly and honestly, rather than through cover-ups and denials. She had documents that could prove the Hertford connection, documents she was willing to share with the Queen if Thomas could arrange a private meeting. Thomas felt overwhelmed. He was a royal guard, trained to protect physical security. This situation involved politics, secrets, and decisions far beyond his experience. He told Margaret that he needed time to think about what she was asking. She nodded and handed him a phone number written on a small card. Before leaving, Margaret warned Thomas about something else. She had noticed unusual activity in the palace communication systems. Someone had been monitoring phone calls and emails, trying to track down anyone who might know about the DNA scandal. Thomas needed to be extremely careful about who he contacted and what he said. After Margaret left, Thomas remained on the bench for a long time. The rain had stopped and the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. He watched the ducks swimming peacefully in the lake and wished his life could be that simple. But there was no escaping the situation now. He had been pulled into the center of a royal scandal, and every choice he made would have consequences. Thomas decided he needed to speak with the Queen directly. He had to tell her about Margaret's research and the documents proving the Hartford connection. But getting a private audience with the Queen would not be easy, especially with surveillance systems monitoring palace communications. He returned to the palace and reported for his regular duty shift. Commander Harrison called him aside and asked about the urgent message from the previous night. Thomas explained that he had information about the Queen's security that needed to be shared with Her Majesty directly. The commander looked skeptical but agreed to pass along the request. Hours passed with no response. Thomas continued his patrol duties, trying to appear normal while his mind raced with worry. Then just before lunch, he received a discreet message. The Queen would see him at 2 o'clock in the private garden. He was to come alone and tell no one about the meeting. At the appointed time, Thomas made his way to the private garden. It was a small enclosed space behind the main residence, accessible only to senior members of the royal family. The Queen was waiting there, sitting on a stone bench surrounded by roses. Thomas approached and bowed respectfully. The Queen looked tired, as if she had not been sleeping well either. She gestured for him to sit beside her. Before Thomas could begin explaining about Margaret Thornton and the Hartford documents, the Queen held up her hand. She told Thomas that she already knew about the records office staff member who had been researching her family history. The palace security team had identified Margaret's activities several days ago. They had been monitoring her movements and communications. The Queen had been waiting to see what Margaret would do with the information she had gathered. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. If the Queen already knew about Margaret, then she must also know about their meeting in the park that morning. He had walked right into a situation that was far more complex than he had realized. The Queen confirmed his suspicion. Security cameras had recorded their meeting. The Queen had watched the footage that very morning. She knew everything Margaret had told him about Lord William Hertford and the wartime affair. She knew about the documents proving the connection to the Duke of Somerset. Thomas waited, uncertain of what would happen next. Would he be punished for the unauthorized meeting? Would Margaret face consequences? The Queen's next words surprised him completely. Queen Camilla told Thomas that she was grateful he had met with Margaret. The records keeper had found pieces of the truth that even the official DNA investigation had missed. The Queen had already decided to confront the situation openly, rather than continuing to hide it. She had arranged a meeting with King Charles and the Duke of Somerset for the following day. The three of them would discuss the Hartford connection and determine how to move forward. But there was one more task the Queen needed Thomas to complete first. She needed him to retrieve Margaret Thornton's documents before anyone else could access them. Those papers contained evidence that could prove the Hartford connection beyond doubt. They needed to be secured in royal custody. Thomas agreed without hesitation. The Queen gave him instructions on how to contact Margaret safely and arrange for the document transfer. As Thomas stood to leave, the Queen called him back. She thanked him for his loyalty and his courage. She told him that history would remember him as someone who helped the royal family navigate a difficult truth with dignity. Those words would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. Thomas contacted Margaret Thornton using the secure method the Queen had provided. They arranged to meet at a quiet location outside London, away from palace surveillance. Margaret arrived carrying a weathered leather case that contained decades' worth of historical documents and correspondence. She handed the case to Thomas without hesitation. Inside were original letters between Rosalind Shand and Lord William Hertford, photographs showing them together during the war years, and birth records that had been carefully hidden away. Margaret had spent months gathering these pieces of evidence, knowing they would eventually need to come to light. Thomas thanked Margaret for her dedication to the truth. She told him that her greatest hope was that this revelation would bring healing rather than scandal. She believed that Queen Camilla and the Duke of Somerset deserved to know their true connection. Family ties should not be destroyed by secrets and lies. As they prepared to part ways, Margaret gave Thomas one final piece of advice. She warned him that not everyone in the palace would support the Queen's decision to reveal the truth. There were advisors and officials who believed that keeping royal secrets was more important than honesty. Thomas needed to be prepared for resistance from powerful people. Thomas returned to Buckingham Palace with the documents secured in the leather case. He delivered them directly to the Queen's private secretary, who had been expecting him. The secretary examined the contents briefly, then locked the case in a secure safe. Everything was now ready for the meeting scheduled for the following day. That evening, Thomas was summoned to Commander Harrison's office. The commander looked stern and troubled. He told Thomas that he had been receiving questions from senior palace officials about Thomas's recent activities. They wanted to know why he had met with Margaret Thornton secretly and what documents had been exchanged. Thomas explained that he had been following direct orders from Queen Camilla. The documents were related to sensitive family matters that the Queen was handling personally. Commander Harrison seemed unsatisfied with this explanation. He warned Thomas that he might face an official inquiry about his conduct. Before Thomas could respond, his phone rang. It was the Queen's private secretary calling with urgent instructions. Thomas was needed immediately at the Queen's residence. There had been a development in the situation. Commander Harrison reluctantly dismissed Thomas, but his expression made it clear that their conversation was not finished. Thomas hurried to the Queen's private quarters. He was met by the secretary, who looked extremely worried. The secretary explained that someone had leaked information about the DNA scandal to the press. A major newspaper was planning to publish a story the following morning, revealing that Queen Camilla had undergone genetic testing and that questions had been raised about her paternity. The Queen emerged from her study, looking shaken but determined. She told Thomas that the leak had forced her hand. Instead of having a private conversation with King Charles and the Duke of Somerset, she would now need to make a public statement addressing the situation. The truth would come out, but not in the controlled manner she had hoped for. Thomas asked who could have leaked the information. The Queen said that palace security was investigating, but there were several possible sources. The laboratory staff at the clinic, the journalist who had called Thomas, or even someone within the palace itself who opposed the Queen's handling of the situation. The Queen made a decision. She would call King Charles immediately and explain everything before he saw the news reports. Then she would arrange an emergency meeting with the Duke of Somerset. They needed to prepare for the media storm that would hit when the story broke. Thomas was instructed to wait outside the study while the Queen made her calls. He stood in the corridor, listening to the muffled sound of her voice through the heavy door. He could tell from her tone that the conversations were difficult and emotional. After an hour, the door opened. King Charles emerged, his face grave but composed. He nodded briefly to Thomas as he passed. Behind him came the Queen, who looked exhausted. She told Thomas that the king had been shocked by the revelation, but he had pledged his full support. They would face this challenge together as a family. The Duke of Somerset arrived at the palace shortly after midnight. Thomas escorted him to the private study where the Queen and King were waiting. The Duke looked confused and concerned, having been summoned urgently with no explanation. Thomas waited outside again while the meeting took place. This time the voices inside were louder. He could hear the Duke's shock and disbelief as the Queen explained the DNA evidence and the Hertford connection. There were moments of silence, then more intense discussion. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. When the door finally opened, the Duke of Somerset emerged looking pale and shaken. The Queen and King followed him out. The Duke turned to face the Queen, and for a moment Thomas thought he might be angry. But then the Duke stepped forward and embraced the Queen warmly. Thomas heard him say that discovering he had a sister was a gift, not a scandal. The King put his hand on the Duke's shoulder, and the three of them stood together in the corridor. Thomas realized he was witnessing a remarkable moment. Despite the shock and the impending media attention, these three people were choosing to see the revelation as bringing them closer together, rather than tearing them apart. The Queen asked Thomas to escort the Duke to a guest suite where he could rest before the morning. As they walked through the palace corridors, the Duke spoke to Thomas about his feelings. He explained that he had always felt something was missing in his life. Learning about his father's wartime relationship with Rosalind Shand somehow made sense of that emptiness. Thomas listened respectfully, honored that the Duke felt comfortable sharing such personal thoughts. When they reached the guest suite, the Duke thanked Thomas for his discretion and his service. He said that Thomas had played an important role in helping the royal family navigate this difficult situation with dignity. Thomas returned to his post, but he knew sleep would be impossible tonight. In just a few hours, the newspaper story would be published. The entire world would learn about Queen Camilla's DNA scandal. The palace communications team was already preparing a statement in response to the article. At 4 a.m, Thomas received a message from the Queen's private secretary. The newspaper had published its story online ahead of the print edition. The headline read, "Royal DNA Bombshell, Queen Camilla's secret paternity test reveals shocking family truth." Thomas read the article on his phone. It contained most of the basic facts about the DNA testing and the Hartford connection. However, it was written in a sensational tone that made the situation seem more scandalous than it actually was. The article speculated about cover-ups and royal secrets, painting a picture of deception and intrigue. Within minutes, the story was being shared across social media. News channels began reporting on the scandal. The palace switchboard was flooded with calls from journalists demanding comments and interviews. The situation that Queen Camilla had tried to handle with sensitivity and privacy was now a global media sensation. At 6 a.m, the Queen called an emergency meeting with her senior staff and communications advisors. Thomas was asked to attend as a witness to recent events. The Queen explained that they needed to get ahead of the narrative. Instead of allowing the media to control the story, they would release a detailed statement explaining the situation in the Queen's own words. The communications team worked quickly to draft a statement. The Queen reviewed every word carefully, making sure it conveyed both the truth and her feelings about the discovery. The statement acknowledged the DNA testing, confirmed the Hartford connection, and expressed her joy at discovering her relationship with the Duke of Somerset. The statement was released at 9 a.m, just as the palace gates opened to the public. Television cameras captured crowds gathering outside, eager for news and reactions. The Queen's statement was broadcast live on major news channels. Her honest and heartfelt words began to shift public perception of the situation. Thomas watched the coverage from the security office. He saw commentators analyzing the statement and experts discussing the implications for the royal family. Many people expressed sympathy for the Queen, praising her courage in addressing the situation openly. Others questioned why such matters needed to be made public at all. As the day progressed, Thomas wondered what would happen next. The immediate crisis had been addressed, but there would certainly be lasting consequences. His role in the events had made him a key witness to one of the most sensitive royal revelations in modern history. Whatever came next, he knew his life would never quite be the same. The days following the Queen's public statement were intense and chaotic. The palace was besieged by journalists from around the world, all seeking additional details about the DNA scandal. Television crews camped outside the gates. Photographers used long lenses to capture any movement within the palace grounds. The story dominated news cycles globally. Thomas found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. Several newspapers had identified him as the royal guard who accompanied the Queen to the medical clinic. Reporters tried to contact him directly, offering substantial sums of money for exclusive interviews. Thomas refused all requests, honoring his commitment to discretion and loyalty. Commander Harrison called Thomas into his office for a formal debriefing. The inquiry that had been threatened earlier was now proceeding. Thomas provided a complete account of his actions, from the initial assignment to escort the Queen, through the accidental discovery of the DNA report, to his meetings with Margaret Thornton and his role in securing the historical documents. The commander listened carefully, taking detailed notes. When Thomas finished his account, Commander Harrison sat back in his chair and studied him for a long moment. Then he told Thomas something unexpected. The Queen had personally intervened in the inquiry, providing a statement that completely exonerated Thomas of any wrongdoing. She had praised his conduct throughout the situation, More than that, the Queen had recommended Thomas for a commendation for exceptional service. She believed his honesty and discretion had helped the royal family navigate the crisis with dignity. The inquiry was being closed with a finding that Thomas had acted appropriately at every stage. Thomas felt relief wash over him. He had worried that his involvement might end his career. Instead, he was being recognized for his contribution. Commander Harrison stood and shook Thomas's hand, congratulating him on handling an impossible situation with professionalism. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla and the Duke of Somerset began building a relationship as newly discovered siblings. They were photographed together at a private family gathering, looking relaxed and happy despite the circumstances. The Duke gave an interview expressing his joy at learning about his sister and his admiration for how she had handled the revelation. Public reaction to the scandal evolved over the following weeks. Initial shock gave way to a more nuanced understanding. Many people appreciated the Queen's courage in addressing the truth openly. Historians and genealogists discussed the wartime circumstances that had led to the secret relationship between Rosalind Shand and Lord William Hertford. Some critics argued that the royal family should have kept the matter private. They believed that revealing such intimate family details was unnecessary and potentially damaging to the monarchy's image. However, polls showed that most of the British public respected the Queen's honesty and felt the situation had been handled well. The investigation into who leaked the story to the press continued for several weeks. Eventually, Palace security identified the source as the supervisor at the medical clinic who had questioned Dr. Mitchell about the royal DNA testing. The supervisor had contacted a journalist friend, not fully understanding the sensitivity of the information. The supervisor lost her job at the clinic and faced potential legal consequences for violating patient confidentiality. Dr. Mitchell issued a public apology on behalf of her facility, promising to review and strengthen their privacy protocols. The Queen chose not to pursue legal action, believing enough damage had already been done. Thomas returned to his regular duties as a royal guard, grateful for the return to normalcy. However, his experience had changed him. He had seen the human side of the royal family, witnessed their struggles with truth and duty. He had learned that even people in positions of great power faced difficult personal challenges. One afternoon, several weeks after the scandal broke, Thomas received an unexpected invitation. Queen Camilla requested his presence at a private afternoon tea in her residence. Thomas was surprised by the informal nature of the invitation, but accepted immediately. He arrived at the Queen's private sitting room to find not only Queen Camilla, but also King Charles and the Duke of Somerset. They welcomed Thomas warmly, thanking him for joining them. The Queen explained that she wanted to personally express her gratitude for his role in helping them navigate the difficult situation. Over tea and biscuits, they discussed how the public revelation had ultimately strengthened their family bonds. The Duke talked about visiting the Hertford family estate to see his father's portrait and learn more about the man he had never met. Queen Camilla described her mixed emotions about discovering the truth about her heritage. King Charles spoke about the importance of truth and transparency in modern monarchy. He believed that while the scandal had been uncomfortable, it demonstrated that the royal family was willing to be honest about their history, even when that history included secrets and complications. As the afternoon progressed, Thomas realized he was witnessing something remarkable. These three people, connected by unexpected family ties and bound by duty to the nation, had chosen to embrace truth over comfortable illusion. They had turned a potential disaster into an opportunity for authentic connection. Before Thomas left, the Queen gave him a small gift. It was a framed photograph of the three of them together at the recent family gathering. On the back, the Queen had written a personal note thanking him for his service and his integrity. She told him that he would always be remembered as someone who helped the royal family during a crucial moment. Thomas returned to his quarters with the photograph, placing it on his desk. He reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past month. He had started as a simple guard following routine orders. He had ended up playing a key role in one of the most significant royal revelations in recent history. Margaret Thornton, the records keeper who had discovered the Hertford documents, also received recognition. The Queen arranged for her to receive an award for her dedication to historical accuracy and her courage in bringing important information to light. Margaret used her newfound visibility to advocate for better preservation of historical records. Dr. Mitchell and her medical facility survived the controversy, though they implemented strict new protocols for handling confidential cases. She wrote a letter to the Queen expressing her deep regret for the breach that had led to the public revelation. The Queen responded graciously, acknowledging that the situation had involved human error rather than malicious intent. As weeks turned into months, the DNA scandal faded from the front pages. Other news took its place. The royal family continued their duties, appearing at ceremonies and charitable events. Queen Camilla and the Duke of Somerset were often seen together at public functions, their newfound relationship adding a positive dimension to the story. Thomas continued his service at Buckingham Palace, now with a deeper understanding of what it meant to protect the royal family. Protection was not just about physical security. It was also about safeguarding their dignity, supporting them through personal crises, and maintaining discretion when appropriate. He occasionally received letters from members of the public who had followed the story. Some people thanked him for his service. Others asked questions about what had really happened behind the scenes. Thomas never responded to these letters, maintaining the discretion that had defined his conduct throughout the affair. One evening, as Thomas stood at his usual post in the palace, he watched the Queen walk past with the Duke of Somerset. They were laughing together about something, looking completely at ease. Thomas smiled, knowing that despite all the turmoil and scandal, something genuinely good had emerged from the situation. The Queen noticed Thomas and paused to greet him. She asked how he was doing and whether he was finding his duties satisfying. Thomas assured her that everything was well. As she continued on her way, she turned back and said something that would stay with him forever. She told him that sometimes the most important service we provide is simply being honest and brave when circumstances demand it. Those qualities, she said, were more valuable than any military skill or security training. Thomas had demonstrated both, and for that she would always be grateful. As Thomas resumed his post, he felt a sense of peace. The scandal had tested everyone involved. It had revealed secrets that had been buried for decades. It had challenged the royal family to choose between comfortable silence and difficult truth. They had chosen truth, and in doing so, they had shown that even institutions as traditional as the monarchy could adapt and grow. Thomas had been privileged to witness that transformation, and to play a small but important role in making it happen. 6 months had passed since the DNA scandal first broke. The media frenzy had long since subsided, replaced by other stories and controversies. Life at Buckingham Palace had returned to its normal rhythms of ceremonies, state functions, and quiet routine. But beneath the surface, everything had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Thomas Bennet had been promoted to the position of Senior Royal Protection Officer. His handling of the DNA crisis had earned him respect throughout the palace security team. He now led a small group of guards responsible for the most sensitive protection assignments. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, but Thomas accepted them gladly. On a cool spring morning, Thomas received a message that Queen Camilla wished to see him in her private study. This was not unusual anymore. Since the scandal, the Queen had occasionally consulted with Thomas on security matters, valuing his judgment and discretion. But today's summons felt different somehow. Thomas arrived at the study to find not only the Queen but also the Duke of Somerset and Margaret Thornton. The presence of all three people who had been central to the DNA revelation surprised him. They greeted him warmly, and the Queen invited him to sit in one of the comfortable chairs arranged in a small circle. The Queen began by explaining that they had gathered to discuss the lasting impact of the events from 6 months ago. She wanted to understand how each of them had been affected, and to share some decisions she had made about moving forward. This meeting, she said, was about closure and new beginnings. Margaret Thornton spoke first. She explained that revealing the Hartford documents had been the most difficult decision of her career. She had worried about betraying the royal family's trust, about causing unnecessary pain, but looking back, she believed it was the right choice. Truth, she maintained, was always better than comfortable deception. The Duke of Somerset shared his perspective next. He described how learning about his half-sister had filled a void in his life he had not even known existed. Growing up as an only child in a vast estate had been lonely. Now at age 62, he had discovered a sister who understood the unique pressures of public life. Their relationship had brought him unexpected joy. Queen Camilla then spoke about her own journey through the revelation. She admitted that initially, learning the truth about her paternity had shaken her sense of identity. She had spent her entire life believing she was Bruce Shand's daughter. Discovering that Lord William Hertford was her biological father had forced her to reconsider who she was. But over time, the Queen continued, she had come to see the revelation as a gift. It had connected her to a new branch of her family. It had given her a brother in the Duke of Somerset. Most importantly, it had taught her that identity was not just about genetics. She was still the same person she had always been, shaped by the love and values of those who raised her. The Queen then revealed the main purpose of the meeting. She had decided to establish a historical foundation dedicated to preserving wartime records and family histories. The foundation would be named after both Bruce Shand and Lord William Hertford, honoring both the father who raised her and the biological father she never knew. Margaret Thornton would lead the foundation, using her expertise in historical records to help families discover their true heritage. The Duke of Somerset had agreed to serve as the foundation's patron, providing financial support and public visibility. The Queen hoped this initiative would turn their personal experience into something that could help others. Thomas listened with admiration. They had transformed a scandal into an opportunity for positive change. The Queen asked Thomas if he would consider serving on the Foundation's Security Advisory Board, helping to protect sensitive historical information while ensuring legitimate research could proceed. Thomas accepted without hesitation. After the formal discussion ended, the four of them shared tea and conversation. They talked about their hopes for the Foundation and their dreams for the future. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, a stark contrast to the tense, secret meetings of 6 months earlier. As Margaret and the Duke prepared to leave, the Queen asked Thomas to stay behind. When they were alone, she told him something she had been wanting to say for months. She thanked him for forcing her to confront the truth by his honest admission of what he had seen at the clinic. If he had lied to protect her feelings, she might have continued trying to bury the secret. Thomas's honesty, the Queen said, had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately strengthened her family and her sense of self. She had learned that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was always preferable to lies and secrecy. This lesson would guide her for the rest of her life. Thomas felt deeply moved by her words. He told the Queen that serving her had taught him similar lessons. He had learned that loyalty meant supporting people through difficult truths, not helping them hide from reality. He had learned that courage sometimes meant admitting what you know, even when silence would be easier. The Queen smiled and told Thomas that he had a bright future ahead of him. She predicted that someday he would lead the entire Royal Protection Service. His combination of integrity, discretion, and courage made him exactly the kind of person the royal family needed in positions of trust. As Thomas left the study, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple assignment to escort the Queen to a medical appointment. That routine task had evolved into something that tested his character and changed his life. He had been thrust into the center of a royal secret, forced to make difficult choices, and ultimately played a role in helping the royal family embrace truth over convenience. Thomas returned to his duties, supervising the security arrangements for an upcoming state visit. His team looked to him for leadership and guidance, trusting his judgment. He took his responsibilities seriously, knowing that protecting the royal family meant more than just guarding their physical safety. That evening, Thomas received a phone call from his mother. She had read news articles about the Queen's new historical foundation and recognized Thomas's name mentioned as a member of the advisory board. She was proud of her son's achievement and wanted to congratulate him. Thomas explained to his mother in general terms how he had become involved in the foundation. He could not share all the details of what had happened, but he told her that he had helped the Queen through a difficult personal situation. His mother told him that his father, who had passed away years earlier, would have been proud of how Thomas had handled himself. The next morning brought news of a documentary being produced about royal family secrets throughout history. The DNA scandal would be featured as a case study in how modern monarchies handle revelations about their past. Thomas was asked to participate in the documentary, but he declined. Some stories, he believed, were not his to tell. Over the following months, the historical foundation grew rapidly, Margaret Thornton hired a team of researchers and archivists. The Duke of Somerset donated a wing of his estate to serve as the foundation's headquarters. Queen Camilla attended the opening ceremony, giving a speech about the importance of understanding family history. The foundation began helping families research their wartime heritage. Many people discovered unexpected connections and hidden relationships. Some found that their grandparents had different fathers than they had believed. Others learned about secret romances that had shaped their family trees. Each discovery was handled with sensitivity and respect. Thomas attended Foundation Board meetings quarterly, providing advice on information security and privacy protection. He enjoyed this work, finding it intellectually stimulating in ways that his regular security duties were not. He began to envision a future where he might work more extensively in historical preservation after retiring from active guard duty. 1 year after the scandal broke, Queen Camilla hosted a private anniversary dinner for the small group who had navigated the crisis together. Thomas, Margaret, the Duke of Somerset, King Charles, and Dr. Mitchell all attended. They shared a meal and reminisced about the tense days when the truth was first coming to light. During the dinner, the Duke proposed a toast. He raised his glass and spoke about how a potential disaster had become a blessing. He had gained a sister. The Queen had gained peace about her identity. And all of them had learned valuable lessons about honesty and courage. They drank to truth, to family, and to the bonds that had been strengthened through difficulty. As Thomas drove home that night, he thought about how much had changed since that morning at the medical clinic. He had accidentally glimpsed a DNA report, setting in motion events that would alter several lives. But those changes had ultimately been positive. The truth had not destroyed the royal family. Instead, it had made them stronger and more authentic. Thomas realized that his greatest contribution had not been any specific action he took. It had simply been his refusal to lie when the Queen asked if he had seen the documents. That single moment of honesty had cascaded into a transformation. It proved that sometimes the smallest acts of integrity could have profound and far-reaching consequences. Years later, when Thomas looked back on his career, he would remember the DNA scandal as the defining experience of his service. It was the moment when he understood that